Good morning. We are continuing our series on the book of Revelation. We will end next week as we talk about new creation, the goal for which God has been moving history. Today, as you could guess from the children's sermon, we're going to talk about the enemies that are finally introduced in the book of Revelation in chapter 12 and 13. From a story point of view, as I was telling the children, the enemies help us understand the hero. When authors write a story, often the enemy is... How many times have you watched a movie and heard the bad guy say, "We're not so different, you and I"? And it's sort of a stock phrase for bad guys because they want to compare the things that they have in common. But the interesting point, the thing that makes for the conflict is not the things they have in common, it's the things that are different. Revelation saves the introduction of the villains for the middle of the book. And a good question is why? If you were making the movie, Revelation, the movie, you wouldn't wait until the middle of the movie to introduce your antagonists. The reason that Revelation waits until the middle is because it's yet another angle on the central message. The revelation of the book of Revelation is Jesus Christ, who He is, and what He is, and what our response should then be. And introducing the enemies just highlights again who Jesus Christ is and what He is coming to accomplish and what our part in that is. We talked about last week that a helpful way for me to think about the book of Revelation is not as a story going chronologically, so much as like a spiral staircase. You come around to some of the same points of view at different places and look out, a spiral staircase with a huge window next to it. And as you come around, there are these stopping points you can look out on the scene ahead. And the scene ahead, what we're looking forward to, what we will eventually get to the top of the staircase and be able to enter out on, is new creation. And the introduction of the enemies sort of highlights, it really is telling the story again. It's sort of going around again. It doesn't really work chronologically, particularly chapter 12. Here's what I want us to do, and this is a little risky. I need you to hang with me. I want us to kind of immerse ourselves in these images for a while. So we're just going to read Revelation 12 and 13. And I want you to read along with me, not out loud, but read along with me. And I want you to really visualize this. These chapters in particular are written for your visual enjoyment. And if you have thought the book of Revelation was a little strange so far, just wait. Revelation 12 and 13. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And she was with child, she was pregnant, and she cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads were 7 crowns. His tail swept away 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. She gave birth to a son, a boy child, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and to His throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she might be nourished for 1,260 days. And there was war in heaven, Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon. And the dragon and his angels waged war, and they were not strong enough, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, "Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of His Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down, who accuses them before our God day and night. And they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life, even to death. For this reason rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, knowing that he has only a short time." And when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, He persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. And the 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman, in order that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she was nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. And the serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, so that he might cause her to be swept away with the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank up the river which the dragon poured out of his mouth. And the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. And I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 crowns, and on his heads were blasphemous names. The beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, because he gave his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war with him? And there was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. And it was given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. And all who dwell on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance and the faith of the saints. I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke like a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. And he makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed. And he performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down out of heaven to the earth in the presence of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was given to him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast, who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. And there was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast might even speak, and causes many who do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And he causes all, the small and the great, the rich and the poor, the free men and the slaves, to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. And he provides that no one should be able to buy or to sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. Gut check time. What emotions do these 2 chapters spark for you? Fear, anxiety, confusion, horror. All of these are pretty appropriate reactions to evil. And that's what we're really given to understand here. I don't think that there's much debate about this. I think this is probably the most misunderstood passage in the book of Revelation. Raise your hand if you have ever gotten an email saying a particular person was the Antichrist. Just me? Okay, all right, y'all have, all right. There used to be, sometimes it still is the fashion to try and pick out who the Antichrist is based on various hints through the Bible. A very popular series of Christian books was published sort of on this idea. By the way, did you notice that the word Antichrist is not in these chapters? In fact, it's not even in the book of Revelation. If anybody ever sends you an email saying that this person is the Antichrist mentioned in the book of Revelation, they're wrong, because there's not an Antichrist mentioned in the book of Revelation. They need to read Revelation more carefully. So this may be the place where we most want to throw out everything that we have heard before. Remember, one of the things that we said about the book of Revelation is that it was written first to first century people. John the Revelator writes to 7 churches in the first century, and he intends for them to understand this. When he says, he who has an ear, let him hear. When he says, here is wisdom, let the one who has understanding calculate this. The first people that he's writing to are them. Then later, generations on down the road, we get to read the book of Revelation and figure out what it means. So it is not the way that biblical prophecy works, for God to give a prophecy to someone and say, I'm going to give you this. You're not going to understand it. It's not for you. It's for other people 2,000 years later. That's pretty arrogant on our part to assume that God has given generations of people the Word of God that doesn't mean anything to them, that it's just for us. That says more about us than it does about the Bible. This was intended to be understood by first century people, and it's intended to be understood by us. It's supposed to make sense to both of us, first century and 21st century. So we need to keep that in mind. It's such a temptation to try to go crazy here and start looking for clues from various other places besides the book of Revelation and try to put together a picture of something that fits our mostly fictional idea of what the book of Revelation is trying to tell us. Let's back up before we do that and look at some details. Chapter 12. There's a pregnant woman and a dragon. Have you ever heard the Christmas story and thought, you know what this story needs is a dragon? Revelation chapter 12 is the Christmas story told from a totally different perspective, told from a very symbolic, sort of visionary perspective of God bringing forth his son, of Satan trying to stop him, of God protecting the people of Israel, and then of the devil making war against the people of God. That's what Revelation chapter 12 is about, but put forth in these incredibly vivid, visionary pictures. Chapter 12 is a retelling of the whole history of God, the whole history of God and the world from the perspective of, in the image of, a cosmic battle with mythical symbols throughout. This chapter, by the way, has been made to carry a lot of weight in trying to understand Satan. The idea that a third of the angels of God followed Satan comes from this chapter where it says the dragon swept a third of the stars out of heaven. But it doesn't say that exactly. It says he swept a third of stars out of heaven. And what do you do with a chapter like this that is so full of symbols? The Bible does not spend a lot of time on trying to explain Satan to us. The Bible does not spend a lot of time on trying to explain anything about what this cosmic battle entailed. It just wants us to know that there are spiritual forces that are opposed to God. And the message is clear about this. He wasn't strong enough. He loses the battle with God. We, Christians, are not dualists. D-U-A-L-I-S-T-S. We're not dualists. Dualists believe that there is a good force and there is an evil force, and those two things have to be held in balance. Or that those two forces are cosmically always battling. We don't believe that. We don't believe in an evil force that is anywhere as strong as God. If you're thinking of the cosmic battle between God and the forces of evil, don't think of it like World War II, where it's not Axis versus Allies. It's more like, this is my favorite illustration. Several years ago, there were a group of people in Texas who said, you know, when Texas was its own country and it became part of the United States, it didn't become part of the United States in the right way. Because it was its own country, there should have been a treaty formed instead of just being annexed as a state. So they said, so logically that means we're still our own country. And they had a little election in their little group, and they elected the president of the Republic of Texas and the vice president of the Republic of Texas. And they had their capital somewhere out in West Texas. So, you know, okay. Then they started stockpiling a lot of guns and saying, we are really the Republic of Texas, and eventually we're going to take over. And that's when the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms said, no, I don't think you are. And the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms said, you can pretend like you're your own country as much as you want, but as soon as you start rebelling against the actual country, that's when there's going to be trouble. It's more like that situation. It's more like the U.S. Army didn't even have to get involved. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms was plenty. You have this rebel force that has this rebel-occupied territory that said, we don't recognize your authority. We are our own authority. That's the situation between the devil and God. We, unfortunately, are living in rebel-occupied territory. We are in a situation where evil forces that are opposed to God happen to be forces active in our world, but God is not sweating about whether or not he's going to be able to defeat the forces of evil. The powers are not equal. They're not even close. We just happen to be in rebel-occupied territory. One of my favorite movies growing up was the Walt Disney movie Robin Hood, and for some reason they made it so that Robin Hood was all animals. Robin Hood was a fox. And Prince John is the prince who has taken over the crown, and the crown doesn't fit him. It fits all lopsided. His head's not big enough to hold the actual crown, so he always wears it cockeyed. And at one point, Prince John captures Robin Hood and wants to put him to death and says he's being put to death as a traitor to the crown. And the actual king is King Richard, who's away on a crusade. And Robin Hood says, "Traitor to the crown, that crown belongs to King Richard. Long live King Richard!" And all the other animals, "Long live King Richard!" That's the situation that we're in. An evil prince has claimed our territory, but the crown doesn't belong to him. We're not traitors to the crown. That crown belongs to someone else. The dragon is defeated, and its tail between its legs, having lost the battle in heaven, now sets up a smaller scale battle on earth. He knows that his time is short, so he wants to do as much damage as possible, and so he wages war on the people of God. Chapter 13 then picks up what that looks like on earth. In chapter 13, and these beasts are drawn from images of beasts in Daniel chapter 7. In Daniel, he has a vision of a series of beasts, and all those beasts stand for different empires. One empire comes, and then that empire goes, and another empire comes, and another empire goes. And each empire is portrayed as a different monster. So here's the first lesson. Empires don't usually portray themselves as monsters. When they make their flag, when they make their symbols, when they make their great seals, they don't put monsters on them. What do they put on them? Some sort of noble, impressive animal. China actually does use a dragon as their symbol, but dragons in China are a little bit different than dragons in the Western world. They're seen as wise. Russia uses a bear as their animal symbol. One of the most popular through history is an eagle. The Romans used the symbol of an eagle. Napoleon in France used the symbol of an eagle. The Nazis used the symbol of an eagle. You might think of other nations that use the symbol of an eagle as their impressive animal. Instead, the book of Revelation, borrowing from Daniel, shows them for what they are. They're monsters. There's a horrible chimera beasts that something is wrong. Something has gone horribly wrong with the creation of this beast. There's a number, actually 3 numbers that come up several times in chapter 12 and chapter 13. At one point it says the woman is taken care of by God for 1,260 days. Another time, and then several times through the book of Revelation, it says something happens for a time, times, and half a time. Here it says that the beast is given authority for 42 months. All of those amount to 3.5. Ancient people thought they calculated their years having 360 days. So 1,260 days is 3.5 years. 42 months is 3.5 years. A time, times, and half a time, 3.5. If 7 is the number of completeness in Revelation, then 3.5 is not quite complete. So at the time, before God has completed his work, this is going to happen. The forces that are opposed to God are going to be opposing God. But that's not the end. That's not the final reckoning. A beast shows up and claims authority. A second beast shows up. And the second beast is the PR person for the first beast. He's the propaganda beast. And he directs attention to that first beast and says, "Look at this beast. Isn't it great?" A lot of superstition has come on verses 16 and 17. He causes all the small and the great, the rich and the poor, the free men and the slaves to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. And he provides that no one should be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark. It's probably not a good idea in general to get microchipped, but being microchipped is not the mark of the beast. That's not what this is talking about. That would not have made any sense to first century people. What it's talking about is the mark on the hand and the mark on the head is what controls your action. What controls what you do? What controls what you think? When God gave the law to the people of Israel, he said, bind it on your hand and bind it on your head. Let it control what you do. Let it control how you think. And here the beast is controlling what people do and what people think. What power does the beast have? The power to kill and the power to make rich. If you want to do business, you got to do business with the beast. If you don't want to do business with the beast, then you die. Probably the most superstition-generating thing is verse 18, the number of the beast. We've talked about symbolism in Revelation, that 7 is the symbol of completeness, and so 6 is the symbol of humanity. And when things get repeated, it sort of emphasizes it. So 6 is the human, a human, a human. So it's a human thing. It's trying to tell us it's a human being that it's talking about. there's another way that numbers were used in the ancient world, and this is the only place like this in the Bible where this happens, where it really was a code. Let him calculate, the book of Revelation says. That, like if we were using the English alphabet, A would stand for 1, and B would stand for 2, and then when you get to the 10th number, or the 10th letter, that letter would stand for 10, and the next one would stand for 20. So there are a lot of systems of how to calculate a name based on a number. I had a seminary professor, in fact, who once gave extra credit that if you could make her name, if you could come up with a system of numbers to make her name come out to 666, she would give you extra credit in class. It could be anything. Just we don't have the code. We don't have the secret code that John the Revelator knew that the other churches that he was talking about would have known, the system that they were using to calculate names based on numbers. We don't have it. And so all kinds of people throughout history have been supposed to be this person. But the best guess, I think, or keep in mind, this was originally written to first century people. So let's just use Mikhail Gorbachev. That's one that I heard when I was growing up. Mikhail Gorbachev is probably the beast. I think it had something to do with the birthmark on his head. Aha! It's the sign of the beast right there on his head. Mikhail Gorbachev is not the Antichrist, and not the beast of Revelation. But let's just say it was Mikhail Gorbachev. If that were true, first century people would have said, aha, Mikhail Gorbachev. Who's that? It would have been something that they would have had to understand, and it's supposed to be something that we're supposed to understand. So a lot of biblical scholars think the most likely guess is Nero, the Emperor Nero. John has been very careful not to use a particular word yet, and he's not going to use it all through the book of Revelation, but the clues are there. John never uses the word Rome. He never says the Roman Empire. Instead, when these evil forces show up, there's series of 7 and 10. Rome, the city of Rome, by the way, sits on 7 hills. At this point in which John was writing the book of Revelation, there had been, up to that point, 10 emperors of the Empire of Rome. Nero had already come and gone. Or was he? There was a rumor throughout the Roman Empire that although Nero had committed suicide, that some people said that he was still alive. That some people said that although it seemed like he was dead, he wasn't actually dead, that in fact he had escaped. And in fact, he was gathering an army, and eventually he was going to come back and take back over Rome. It would be like if there were a rumor in the United States that Richard Nixon was not dead, that in fact he had gone somewhere else and that he was going to gather an army and come back and take over the United States. It was like that. Nero, by the way, was a piece of work. That's a precise theological term, piece of work. You know, the sort of typical piece of work things. He had various members of his family assassinated. But this, I think, probably gives you the best picture of who the Emperor Nero was. When he was emperor of Rome, he had a statue built of himself, 90 feet tall, 98 feet tall actually, 98-foot tall bronze statue of himself dressed up as the god of the sun. And there was a globe at his feet. They knew the earth was round at that point. There was a globe at his feet, and it didn't have a steering wheel because the ships then had a tiller, a thing that would turn the rudder. So there was a tiller stuck in the globe, and Nero, as the sun god, in a 90-foot tall statue, standing in the middle of Rome, was Nero with his hand on the tiller of the world. That's who Nero thought he was. That fits pretty well, doesn't it? This beast is in charge of the world. This beast has the power to kill. I want you to see what John has done, and this comes from a Revelation scholar called Richard Bauckham. The Revelation is not so much interested in showing us the Antichrist. It's bigger than that. What the book of Revelation, particularly 12 and 13, shows us is that Satan has tried to put himself in the place of God, that the beast has tried to put himself in the place of Christ. Revelation chapter 1 tells us that Christ is the ruler of the kings of the earth. And here it's the beast who set himself up as the ruler of the kings of the earth. And the second beast, the one who directs the attention to this first beast, has put itself in the place of the Holy Spirit. It's not just an antichrist, it's an anti-trinity. The forces of evil have tried to push out all reference to God and put themselves in the place of God. It's not just about one particular person, it's about powers at work in the world. But wait, John's not finished yet. There's another picture of the same power, but in a different image. Turn to Revelation chapter 18. Instead of beasts now, the empire is presented as a city and as a prostitute. Queen of the prostitutes, actually. Now look at Revelation 18, verses 1 through 5. This is the song that is sung after she falls, but it gives you an idea of what you could expect. After these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illumined with his glory. And he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She's become a dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit, a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her. And the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality, the wealth of her luxuriousness. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that you may not participate in her sins, and that you may not receive of her plagues. For her sins have piled up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Look over at verse 9. We'll go through verse 11, and we'll stop there for a second. The kings of the earth, who committed acts of immorality and lived sensuously, lived luxuriously with her, will weep and lament over her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance because of the fear of her torment, saying, Woe, woe, the great city Babylon, the strong city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her, because no one buys their cargoes anymore. The same enemies, pictured a different way, here as a queen and as a prostitute queen. When she's destroyed, as the Roman Empire was eventually destroyed, the world mourns. Why? Not because, we've lost all this great Roman art. Not because, we've lost all this great Roman culture. The kings of the earth mourn because this is the end of their luxury. We got all our best stuff from there, and now it's gone. The merchants of the earth mourn because they made so much money off of this empire. And now all that money's gone. There's a very, very silly show that I watched when I was a kid about a superhero, and he was out in space one day, and the aliens were about to attack the earth, and his response was, but that's where I keep my stuff. And so that's the idea that we're supposed to get here. The empire is about to be destroyed, but that's where I keep my stuff. That's where the things that we really value belong, is in the empire. But it's even worse than that. The most devastating verses in the book, I think, are Revelation 18, 11 through 14. And again, I want you to imagine yourself walking through a Roman market. It's market time. It's time to go shopping in the city of Rome. The merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold and silver and precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and every kind of citron wood and every article of ivory and every article made of very costly wood and bronze and iron and marble and cinnamon and spice and incense and perfume and frankincense and wine and olive oil and fine flour and wheat and cattle and sheep and cargoes of horses and chariots and slaves and human lives. And the fruit you long for is gone from you, and all the things that were luxurious and splendid have passed away from you, and men will no longer find them. It gets me, man, that twist of the knife at the end, going down this laundry list of all the great stuff you can buy in Rome, and right at the end is the slave market, where you can buy people. And just that twist of the knife, that the merchants are mourning. This is what they're sad about. We made so much money off of all this stuff, including other people that we sold and used for our benefit. Literally, it says human souls, slaves and human souls. Just another thing to make money off of. And now it's gone, and we're sad. John never uses the word Rome in Revelation. He always uses a word rich in Old Testament meaning. Egypt, and especially Babylon, the place that takes the people of God into exile. Babylon. And if you're ready to wipe your brow and say, whew, well, glad I don't have to worry about the Roman Empire anymore. Glad it's gone. If you're ready to wipe your brow and say, whew, I was concerned. Now I know it's just Nero. Nero's been dead a long time. Wait just a second. Because I think there's another reason that John uses Babylon. I think he's saying, not so subtly, that every empire is the same. Rome, Babylon, Egypt, Nazi Germany, modern empires, they're all the same, really. What do they care about? Power and money. Power here defined as the ability to kill whoever gets in their way. A Roman poet said about Rome, they make a desert and call it peace. Power and money. Do you hear the song they sang in chapter 13? Who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war with him? Substitute in any name of any empire into that song. Who is like whoever, and who is able to wage war? And the song doesn't change, but it helps us see through the lie. Every empire is basically the same. Moses comes to Egypt and says, God told me to tell you, let my people go. And Pharaoh says, your people? Those are my people. They're my slaves. I own them. They're mine. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, says to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I told you to bow down and worship. And if I kill you, what God is going to save you from me? And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say, our God can, but even if he doesn't, we're not going to worship you. We're not going to worship anyone else. Pilate says to Jesus, Pilate, governor of a Roman province, don't you know that I have the power to take your life? And Jesus says, no one takes my life. I offer it up to God. No one's going to take my life unless I lay it down. Every empire tries to rule the world by force or economics or both. And every empire that succeeds the next empire thinks of itself as more powerful, wealthier, wiser, more honorable, more glorious, and more blessed than all the preceding empires. All those other empires, they were evil empires, but we're the good empire. We do it right. We're fighting for whatever. But really, it's about power and money. And they're all wrong. They're all pretenders. The real ruler of the world is someone else, the only one worthy in heaven and on earth. Revelation chapter 5 told us that only one is worthy of power and wealth and wisdom and honor and glory and blessing. And that's the Lamb that was slain. Revelation pulls back the curtain and says to any nation or empire seeking to make itself great, what do you mean by great? How are you defining great? What do you mean by that? Do you mean powerful and rich? Then take a look at your marketplace and see if there are human souls for sale there. Take a look at what you think is really worth value. And is your stuff, is your luxury of more value than the human souls that are part of your kingdom? And if not, then you're not great. Not the way God defines it. Take a look in the mirror. The book of Revelation says to the empire, pull back the curtain. Take a look around. See if you see any spots like a leopard, feet like a bear, a mouth like a lion. Look behind you a little bit and see if you don't see Satan pulling your strings. Don't think you are who you think you are. Let me tell you this, and you can debate me later if you want. Don't debate me in the middle of the sermon. I have nightmares about that. God's agenda is not to make any particular nation great. That is not on God's to-do list. God's agenda is not to make any particular nation great. God's agenda is for his people to overcome and to inherit a new creation. That's what's revealed when you pull back the curtain. Maybe the most important verse in the book is Revelation 12:11. Did you catch it? In chapter 1, Jesus said, to the one who overcomes, he will give reward. Over and over. In chapters 2 and 3, he says to the churches, to the one who overcomes, I will grant to be part of the new creation. To the one who conquers, to him I will give these things. And here in Revelation 12:11, of all places, we get a definition. They overcame him, Satan. They overcame Satan because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony. And they did not love their life even unto death. That's what victory means. It matters very much how we define what victory is, and that's how Revelation defines it. We've said several times, Revelation is about who is Jesus Christ. Who is Jesus Christ in the book of Revelation? The Lamb that was slain, the faithful and true witness, the ruler of the kings of the earth. And we follow in his pattern if we want to overcome. The Lamb that was slain, our victory is in his blood. His self-sacrifice won him the victory, and our sacrifice of ourselves wins us the victory. Our testimony They overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. Our testimony is that He alone is worthy. Our testimony is that we belong to Him and no one else. That's who we are. He is the ruler of the kings of the earth. He is our King. And we are not going to bow to anyone else, even if we're threatened with death because of it. By the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony, He's the faithful and true witness. And so that means that we get to be the people who tell the truth, and that we don't have anything to do with people who don't tell the truth. He is the ruler of the kings of the earth, and we're going to bow to Him even if it costs us our life. Every empire only has one trick. Do what we say or we'll kill you. And that's the only trick they have. And to that, God says, I raised the dead. What else you got? And that's the only trick they have. The fair face of every empire is a lie, and underneath it is a beast. But it's a beast whose bark is worse than its bite. The best it can do is kill. The most it can do is kill. The worst it can do is kill. That's all it can do. And we worship a God who can make alive again. Not only our life, but the entirety of creation. The whole earth made new. The whole universe made new. The truth is, living in rebel-occupied territory like we are, we're going to be asked in various ways to bow our head and our hands. The way in which we think, what we are told we need to do. And if we refuse, we will be called traitors to the crown. To which we answer, traitor to the crown? That crown belongs to the Lamb that was slain. Long live the Lamb that was slain. We are in rebel-occupied territory. But the King is coming. The real King. And that's why worship is so important. This is how I fight my battles. When it feels like I'm surrounded by evil forces that are opposed to God, I know that you surround me. Any power that the world can offer against me, you have already overcome. You already won. That's why obedience is so important. It's not so that we can check off these things that we did right, that everybody else is doing wrong. It's because obedience shows who we are, who our allegiance is to. Who we follow is based on how we obey. If this message gets you fired up, like it gets me fired up, let it fire you up to overcome in the way the Lamb showed us. Self-sacrificial love. Telling the truth in a world of lies. Obedience to His commands, no matter the cost. All the forces of evil only have one trick, and our God's already beaten them. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we ask for your grace on us as we live in a world that's still waiting for its redemption, as we live in a world that's waiting for the return of its King. I pray, God, that our obedience to you would be a testament to our allegiance to you. I pray, God, that our telling the truth about who you are, or telling the truth in general, would be a testament to who you are and to what you want to do with our world. I pray, God, that you would help us to follow the Lamb, to fight our battles, God, by worshiping Him, to fight our battles by being obedient to Him and following His command, first of all, to love the Lord our God and to love our neighbor as ourselves. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.